Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. You know, one of the things I was just talking a little bit about with our speakers this morning is almost as soon as we sent out the save the date notice for this program, responses were coming in literally within the hour, and they have continued to come, and that's reflected in the size of our audience this morning. And I really think that indicates two things. One of which is the very real fear that people have about shootings in a place where kids should feel the safest in their schools. And that fear, obviously, as we well know, not being entirely unfounded in terms of where these things can happen. And I think this number is just staggering. As of March 1st, so just last week, in the United States, we had already experienced 100 mass shootings. So that is more than one a day. And the really terrifying piece is, first of all, that number is, we reach that number sooner in the year than we ever have before. And second of all, and I ask you to think back a minute to Columbine, which was probably the first big school shooting that we knew about. And think about the coverage of that. Think about the Nightline and those programs for weeks afterwards. We're talking about that. The papers were filled with it. I just commend to you now that if you read the Boston Globe and you actually read the print edition, if you look on the inside of the first page in the morning, school shootings now are relegated to the little boxes on the bottom of that page. That's how routine these have become. And I'm sure many of you experienced it during a couple of weeks earlier this year. Events happened so fast that literally I was thinking, which shooting are they talking about? And so that's what we're confronting. But the good piece, I think, is that the response that we got for today reflects something else. That as strong as that fear is, there is just as strong a desire in our community to be a part of making a real concrete difference and working together as we do so well in Middlesex to confront gun violence. I think that we all know you have to do more. We're going to need to do more than just teaching kids how to try to stay safe in the worst case scenario. And I really want to thank our panelists who are with us today and all of you for that desire to make a really tangible difference on something that's so important. And again, the need to do things differently is reflected not just in the numbers, but I think as probably many of you saw, one of the pieces that I found resonated so much with me was when I read about the shooting recently on the campus of Michigan State. Terrible as that was, to read about the kids who were there, who had been high school students last year at Oxford High School, where there'd been a mass shooting, and to the children who had been at Sandy Hook and the other schools, the other elementary schools in that town when that shooting happened. And there was one young woman who said, I'm not yet 21, and I've been involved in 2 mass shootings. And that really indicates that our kids need us to be doing better. And the amazing piece for me is how much young people are doing. We're overwhelmingly hearing from them in our communities that gun violence is an issue that they care about. You might have seen our Save the Date graphic, and that picture showed Post-its that the girls at our Empowering Girls program, which we had a couple months ago, and we were fortunate enough to have Valerie Biden, the president's sister, come and speak to the girls. But one of the things we asked the girls, the 400 girls who came together, was write down an issue that matters to you. And what is something that during your lifetime you would like to make a difference on? And there was a range, as you would expect, of thoughtful responses, but we were really struck by the number of girls who wrote something down about gun violence. Whether it was, I hope that somehow I can reduce gun violence. I want to make sure kids feel safe in school because I don't always feel safe. and passing stronger gun laws is something that I want to be involved in. And we're really seeing that not only are kids thinking that's something they want to do, but young people are really advocating for change in a way we haven't seen before. They're empowered, they're lifting their voices, they are living through these things and bringing that lived experience to the legislature. We just saw a group of high school and college students at the State House gathered outside rallying to call on the legislature to really address gun violence in a way they have not done before. And meeting that challenge is our job. And for us and on this office and as the district attorney of the largest county in the Commonwealth, covering 54 diverse cities and towns, almost 2 million people, every day in Middlesex County. And I think we're going to talk a lot about the personal today, but also just the numbers are staggering. Here in Middlesex County, every single morning, we have just under 250,000 children from kindergarten to grade 12 who head out to school. And every one of us as parents believes and hopes that they are going to go to school and come back to us at the end of the day safely. That's an enormous responsibility. And we are really taking gun violence and gun safety from every possible perspective. We're proactive, we're aggressive, and we're really being informed by the evidence on what the best practices are. We are investigating and prosecuting gun crimes across the county, working with our local, state, and federal partners. Sarah and I were just talking this morning about our partnerships to get guns off the street. Those guns that threaten everybody in our community. We just disrupted a large-scale drug and fire operation in Lowell, and the amazing number of guns that we took off there. We were talking about at the press conference that we did after that. If you assumed every one of those guns was only used once, which we know isn't the case, what is the harm that could be inflicted by the firepower we had in that room? We are not only enforcing the laws that we have, but we're really advocating for stronger gun laws. And in this arena, we've been working with our legislative partners, many of whom are here today, to draft and ban bills that will address an issue that is increasingly becoming a problem for us, and that is the issue of ghost guns. And if you don't know what those are, ghost guns are truly terrifying because you buy a gun that is 80% assembled and you use a 3D printer to assemble the other pieces, the other 20% that you need to put that gun together. And one of the things that is so frightening about that is that everybody who's getting a ghost gun is somebody who can't legally get a gun for one reason or another, whether it's their age, their criminal record, something else. If you've gone to buying a ghost gun, it's because you can't legally buy a gun. And I'll talk a little bit about what's so frightening about those, but I want to just mention as well, last but certainly not least, one of the things that we do well here, and I think separates us from many other prosecutors' offices, is we are really looking to lead the way on preventing gun violence. We don't just want to be showing up after something's happening. I don't just want to be arresting people for having a gun. I want them not to have that gun in the first place. And, we have, as everyone knows, some of the strictest gun laws in the country in Massachusetts. We are the safer because of that. We have very strict licensing requirements. But as I mentioned, and it's the reason we are a target, because gun manufacturers, like everybody else, like the people who are making coffee and cookies and everything else, want to go where there is a market. The laws are strict here in Massachusetts. That creates a market for guns among people who can't meet our requirements. So if you can't legally get a firearms identification card or a license here in Massachusetts and you want a gun, and there are lots of those people, you've got to go outside of the system to do that. And that's why we have really been inundated with these ghost guns, with the ads for them, with the sending them here. And the access to those is just unbelievable in terms of what it means for committing a crime. Because those guns have no serial numbers, they were not legally manufactured. You can literally commit a crime and leave the gun at the scene, and we won't be able to do much with it because we cannot trace that gun. And that number has gone up so dramatically. When we first saw them here about 7 years ago, it was just such a rare occurrence. As you can see from the article we just put in the chat about these investigations, now they're everywhere. And I'll tell you a little bit about my first experience with that. Was a young man who was 13, and he was in his basement. The family had a 3D printer. He was making those guns. And he and his 7-year-old sister, he lived in one of our communities where the houses are pretty large. They're set pretty far apart. They've got some wooded area behind the house. He and his 7-year-old sister were going out into the backyard and essentially doing shoot the can with the ghost guns. And neighbors seeing the kids outside didn't believe, obviously, it could be guns and thought they were setting off firecrackers. And the interesting piece about ghost guns is they are one of the few types of guns that are as dangerous to the people using them as they are to the people they're being fired at. Because if you think about it, firing a gun sets off an enormous explosion inside of that gun to propel the bullet out of the gun. That's why guns, a legal gun, is obviously made out of metal, out of steel, to encompass that explosion. If you are taking plastic parts out of the 3D printer and putting them in there, they don't withstand that as well. Number one, they are more unstable, so they can go off if they're dropped or mishandled. And number two, they can blow apart from that explosion. We recently had a scene where we found the ghost gun having been used. We found it in pieces on the floor because it had literally blown apart after being fired. So we are seeing people, as we did this fall, in cases of a kidnap and an assault of a woman. The gun was left there because it was a ghost gun. There was no serial number, absolutely no way to trace it. We also recently found a man in Cambridge who had no ability to have a gun license because of his background. He had built and had in his home 30 ghost guns. He had just bought the kits, it's perfectly legal, used his printer to create the rest of those. And the other piece is that it is another way, particularly that young people, too young to buy a gun, can get access to the gun. And they are completely unaccounted for. In 2021, I testified before the Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security in support of some very common sense gun legislation, both on the ghost guns and the other situation that we are increasingly seeing in twofold. One of which is we do not have, just think about this for a second, in all of the laws that we have in Massachusetts, we do not have a law either that appropriately punishes shooting at a home. So if I drive by your house, and for whatever reason, I'm mad at you, I want to intimidate you, I want to settle a score, I fire at your house. And fortunately, I don't hit anyone, but I damage your house. Maybe I don't even damage it, I'm just shooting at the house. Right now in Massachusetts, I could only be charged with discharging a firearm within 500 feet of a building, a fairly insignificant charge. Or if I manage to hit your mailbox or hit something else, I might be able to be charged with willful or malicious destruction of property. That in no way reflects the terror that I've inflicted on you and your family or your neighborhood. And we've all seen those stories, and we have had some incredibly close calls here in Middlesex of a baby sleeping in a crib and a bullet flying into the wall above their head, someone resting on their couch watching TV inside the living room and a bullet coming through the living room window. I grew up in Somerville. Somerville has had way too many of these incidents of late, where people have had bullets come through the living room window. We don't have a statute that appropriately punishes that. And it's something that's being used to terrorize people. The other piece is, and this I think is truly shocking, is that we do not have a statute that appropriately punishes the reckless discharge of a gun into a crowd of people. So some of you may remember a couple of years ago, at about 3:30 in the afternoon, right around the time that school was getting out, we had 2 carfuls of young men driving down Memorial Drive and into Kendall Square. They were shooting at each other, just guns out the window, shooting randomly. People on the sidewalk, people driving by. Fortunately, no one was hit. But we still do not have statutes that appropriately charge the risk that was created by that behavior. So we are supporting 2 pieces of legislation that would deal with that. And that also speaks to what I believe is our obligation as prosecutors, which is not just to show up in a community after something bad has happened. We also spend a lot of time being proactive in using our resources to gather, as we have today, experts and information from around the country. So we know we're going where the evidence shows us. What is it that actually works? And part of the reason, and this goes back to what I began with, talking about what our kids are asking us, part of the reason that prevention is so important to me is it is unacceptable that before noon tomorrow, 12 kids on average will be killed by gun violence. 12 kids. It's almost a whole classroom in some schools. And across this country, they will lose their life within the next 24 hours. The New England Journal of Medicine notes that firearms deaths among children have become the #1 cause of death. Not illness, not car accidents, not falling out of their cribs, not any of those things, but a firearm death. And that's just staggering. And also, as I talked about with respect to the shootings, I always wonder that people get a little numb or a little dazed because they're happening so often. And yet we know that those numbers are going up. You know, during the pandemic here in Middlesex, we saw a decline, despite what everybody was saying, in every kind of crime across the county, the exception of 2. One was hate and bias motivated crimes, and the other was firearm crimes, particularly around young people. And I hope that those numbers are a call to action, that each of us, in whatever discipline we work or whatever part of society, will stay focused on doing our part around keeping kids safe, preventing gun violence, and making sure that our approach is centered around equity. And we really need every one of those components to effectively address gun violence, prevent tragedy. And this expert witness program series is part of our prevention and intervention work. It's my aim to make these events tangible and meaningful. I hope that you leave today with 3 or 4 new strategies or ideas that you've jotted down that you can implement, new things that you want to learn about, or things that your school, your business, your workplace, your faith community can become involved in helping us to address this. We have an amazing group of speakers this morning. I want to give you a little roadmap for where we're going to be going with all of them. We're going to start by hearing a personal account, an interview with a mother from Michigan who helped to intervene and prevent what could have been a violent school shooting. And, you know, I think this interview, and we had hoped to have the mom here with us today, but yes, we learned yesterday she couldn't be here. So we've got an interview, taped interview. It also speaks to, it's easy to say after these things, somebody should have done something. Think about that as a parent. Think about calling the police on your child. What are we asking you to do? And in what setting are we asking you to do it? And what support are we giving you for doing that? Then we're going to hear about some tangible prevention and intervention resources from Sandy Hook Promise, and the perspective of one of our districts here in Middlesex has been so involved with us on these issues, the Medford Public Schools. And we'll close out by hearing from Sarah Wielden, an FBI Boston field agent and the threat assessment coordinator, about the resources that exist for our schools and local law enforcement, parents, anybody tuning in terms of what you can and should do when you see warning signs in young people and what those warning signs are. So thank you again for being here. We are going to begin, as I said, with the story of Nicole Schubert. As I said, Nicole was planning to be here with us this morning, but her family had an emergency yesterday that made that impossible in Michigan. So she's agreed to let us use the interview segment from Good Morning America. There's also a very interesting piece, which I read about her in the Wall Street Journal. Having seen that interview and read that article, we reached out to her and she agreed to come and talk about the fact that she felt as a mom, as difficult as it was to report her own child, that if she had a chance to keep even one child safe, that was her obligation. And I found that so impressive, that a parent had the ability, the courage to make herself that vulnerable and speak out in order to appeal to other parents and to try to get that information out there. So we're going to go to that interview from Good Morning America from Nicole.
One mother's tragic choice. In the wake of mass shootings, we often ask, how were warning signs missed? Why did no one speak up? Well, one mom did speak up. Nicole Schubert turned her son in when she saw signs he was planning an attack on his school. It's a story we first saw in the Wall Street Journal. TJ spoke with her. Hey, TJ.
First instinct as a parent, right, George, is to protect your child. It's your responsibility. But what is a parent's responsibility to protect other children from your own child? Well, this mom you're about to hear from had to face that question. And like you just said, George, at a time these mass shootings, questions about what signs were missed or ignored. This mom didn't ignore the signs, turned her son in, and she believes that decision prevented mass murder.
And he told me, if I do this interview today, I will not talk to you for a very, very long time. If there's a possibility to save even one person, one child, I think it's worth it.
But as you sit here, there's not a day that goes by that you regret what you did in calling police on it.
No, I don't regret it, because I believe I saved lives.
Nicole Schubert called the cops on her son after she says she found his journal detailing plans of a horrific killing spree that was to begin at home.
It was very descriptive. It was just heartbreaking. I didn't really want to know the details.
One of the things he wrote, if I have this right, is that he wanted to kill his mom, you. What's it like for a mother to read something like that?
Devastating. That's my child. I gave birth to him. You know, it hurts a lot. It still hurts. He says that it was just a story, but I don't know how.
Schubert says she was cleaning her home in 2019 when she came across her son's notebook. She says he described how he'd kill her, then attack his high school in Washington State, where he was a 17-year-old senior at the time. Schubert says she didn't debate long about what to do, calling police just hours later.
Your first instinct is, as a parent, is to protect your child. But at that point, I felt like if he is actually going to do these things, he would be safer in jail.
You were thinking of protecting maybe your own child, but your thoughts had to be on a lot of other children.
Well, the school, I have a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends that have children there. It wasn't just about me and him at that point. It was about a whole school. Hundreds of people, hundreds of children.
Schubert turned over the notebook and told law enforcement she'd also previously found what she believed were the makings of a homemade pipe bomb in her son's room. He was arrested, pled guilty to a felony charge of threatening to bomb or injure property and misdemeanors for harassment. He completed a rehabilitation program, community service, and underwent a mental evaluation. Now, in the wake of recent mass shootings and attention on missed warning signs, Schubert wants to appeal to parents.
Stay in their business. Even if they don't like it, they're not going to like it. But as parents, it's our job to know what our kids are doing. Just be aware and watch for signs. Kids will normally tell you by their actions when something is wrong.
Do you believe parents should be held responsible in some cases for what their kids do in these mass shootings?
Yeah, to a certain point, yeah. I think parents are responsible. Yes, most definitely. Now, obviously, we can't control our children's actions all the time. Who can? But there's signs that, something's not right. Something's, why is he acting weird? Why is he so to himself? I was in his room, what are you doing? Where are you going? All the time. And he hated it, but he's alive. And everyone's alive, and he's not in jail.
She says her son has not had any trouble with the law ever since. He's working and wants to go to college.
You just pray. You just pray that God helps them make the right choices through life. Because what else can you do? He's over 18 now. He's my child. I love him unconditionally. I'll always be there for him. I'll always love him, no matter what he does.
Schubert says they did not have guns in the house. She does not know of him having access to guns. And to this day, she says he still contends that what he was writing in that notebook was just a matter of fantasy and that wasn't a real plan. But we have to remember, guys, the shooting at a school killed 4 in Michigan last year. Those parents have been charged with involuntary manslaughter. Buffalo shooter, one of the survivors, has put on notice that they plan to possibly file a lawsuit against those parents. And also the Highland Park shooter, the prosecutor there has not ruled out possible charges. So we might start seeing this. We're looking for ways to combat these mass shootings, going after the parents, holding them responsible, and bringing more notice to this could be a way to do it.
Yeah, no, that was a tough decision, but the right one.
Impossible to even imagine doing something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right, thank you, TJ.
Well, hey there.
Thank you. One of the things that I think Nicole's story points out is that importance of being aware of the warning signs. But, just as importantly, you can see all the warning signs in the world. You need to know what's out there, how you can help your kids. Because seeing them isn't the whole point of this. It is figuring out what's available. And I know we have lots today of teachers and school leaders, K through 12, on with us. My hope is that you are right now thinking about what kinds of programs and interventions might have helped Nicole's son and what earlier in school maybe. And that's why we're going to turn now to learning about some of the resources that are out there for prevention and intervention. And I'll just take as a side note, I saw in the chat, people were asking about our legislation. We'll put the text of our bills and the numbers in the chat as well. Would be grateful if you reach out to your legislators to support those bills. I tell people this all the time. Legislators will tell you that receiving 6 calls about a particular bill raises that bill up to a level where they're now taking another look at it. So it's a very small number. I think these are very common sense safety proposals. All right, now we're going to turn to Darlene Faster, who joins us from Sandy Hook Promise, where she serves as the Senior Director for the Northeast region for that national nonprofit organization, obviously founded in the wake of the terrible tragedy at Sandy Hook. Darlene oversees the organization's Know the Signs program across the Northeast, making schools and communities safer through that leadership on multiple federally funded state partnerships. Darlene has more than 17 years of education, nonprofit experience in school safety, violence prevention, and school climate improvement, working at the district, the state, and the national level. Prior to joining Sandy Hook, Darlene was the Chief Operating Officer of the National School Climate Center for 12 years. She led the school climate measurement and improvement efforts that were being put in place across the country, developing a youth-led bully prevention awareness campaign. And think of how many of these incidents we hear that the perpetrators had experienced some bullying in school. And also promoting whole child education best practices through large scale projects, collaborating with National Education Association, state and other entities. Darlene has also pursued a doctorate in education policy and disability studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And obviously, I mentioned Sandy Hook Promise was founded after that shooting just before the holidays in 2012 at Sandy Hook. But the mission that the families really centered on when they founded Promise was to educate and empower young people and adults to prevent something like Sandy Hook ever happening again. And they've done programs, they've organized, they've done legislative advocacy, research. They've really been a national leader. And I have to say, especially with respect to the parents who stayed involved, it is heartbreaking. But I think as a parent, if you ever think about what you would want in the terrible situation where you might lose a child, it is that your child would be remembered and that something good would come of that tragedy. And that's really what Sandy Hook Promise has tried to do. And I'm very grateful to have Darlene here with us this morning to talk about that. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, District Attorney Ryan, for making the space for this really important conversation and for us to share some of the practical work on the ground. I'm very excited for y'all to hear from Stacy Shulman at Medford Public School District and from Ariana Williams, who is a youth leader at Tantascwa School District in Massachusetts, but also on our Youth Advisory Board. So I get to share some of the background, but I'm actually really excited to give you the chance to hear from them directly. So I am just going to share my screen really quickly, make sure that this is all working for everybody. Okay. Okay. Everybody's good. We can see the screen. All right. So as DA Ryan noted, I oversee our implementation across the Northeast region for our Know the Signs prevention programs. And through that work, we've had the honor to work with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office over the past 5 years on a federally funded Stop School Violence grant, which gave us the opportunity to support 54 school districts all across the state to implement 2 of the programs and some other work that you're going to hear about today. And so we are very, very grateful for the partnership of the Attorney General's office throughout this time and their incredible team that have worked with us on this. So Sandy Hook Promise, as DA Ryan noted, was founded after the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School a little over 10 years ago. When some family members who lost loved ones came together, really trying to unpack how do we prevent another tragedy like this from ever happening again. And they brought together a wide variety of experts, school safety experts, education leaders, law enforcement, and mental health professionals to unpack that question and came up with some critical programs that really kind of met a gap, a need within the school community. And that brought us to our mission, which is to educate, empower youth and adults to prevent violence in schools, in homes, and communities. So DA Ryan actually touched on one of these stats that you see here. Every day, 12 children die from gun violence in America. Another 32 are shot and injured. What we know is that schools are mostly safe from violence and mass shootings, right? But they are not immune. And so our work is really to kind of step into that space and ensure that they have the resources and the supports to prevent violence in any form, right? We're not just talking about gun violence, we're talking about bully prevention, cutting suicide ideation that could happen within school communities. And we know from the data at the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service data that's come out that in most cases, there are signs. And so our programs are really to help our school communities unpack what those signs are and how they can help get support for the student that is at need. All right, and so Our approach, this is kind of how we go through our work. We really focus on research-informed curricular and training supports, and everything we're doing is focused on upstream prevention. We want to create a generational change within school communities where this kind of violence is no longer the norm. We're establishing partnerships with state agencies, school districts, and individual schools to deliver high quality training and technical assistance. A lot of what you're going to hear me talk about today is driving you towards our free resources that are available to all school communities across the country. And we do additional work on top of that that is a little bit more intensive, a little bit more guided by our team. And that work often happens through federal funds or other, supports that we get throughout the country. We deliver those trainings and then deploy a highly trained crisis counselors who triage and partner with the local intervention teams when there is an identified need. And most importantly, I think we're leveraging youth voice and leadership because they are the centerpiece of this work. They're the eyes and ears within the school community, and they are also a really powerful motivation for change within the school community. And what the research says, not just our work, but also in our work, is that upstream prevention strategies are the most effective way to prevent gun violence. I will pop a white paper that we published a little over a year ago into the chat after I speak so that you can read more about that data. But Secret Service 2021 analysis also noted that in thwarted school shootings, upstream prevention strategies emphasizing social connection, fostering supportive school climate are the most effective in preventing gun violence. If we prioritize inclusion, we're educating the community on the warning signs and reinforcing identification and intervention, we can sustain that, that support over time and really reduce the factors of violence. We've also worked very closely with the University of Michigan School of Public Health on a number of studies. And what we've found over time is that for our first program, Start with Hello, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second, we've seen significantly improved perceptions of school safety in intervention work that we've done. And also working with UMich and the LA Unified School District, we found that Say Something, our second program that I'll cover a little later on, significantly improved trusting relationships with adults, a willingness to report issues, and increase school perceptions. The big thing that I want to underscore here is that what I'm going to talk through today is completely at no cost. All of these programs are at no cost to school communities. Our founders were very, very committed to that there not be a barrier to getting access to these life-saving resources. And all of them are aligned with the core social emotional learning competencies that come out of CASEL. So that schools can really think about the integration points, right? They're not kind of inventing something new when they're bringing our programs in. They're aligning them with what's already happening within the school community. So focusing on self-management, relationship skills, social awareness, and responsible decision-making as a core component of their work. So the first program, which is really kind of our entry point program, it is great. It's K through 12, teaches students how to identify and minimize social isolation in order to create a more inclusive, connected school community. And it is grounded in 3 very simple steps: see someone alone, reach out and help, and then start with hello. So the entire program is really helping our students to figure out how they do that, how they go about that process. And what we've seen as outcomes is that we have a much more connected school community. Bullying is reduced. We foster greater socialization and this feeling of upstanders within the school community, students kind of standing up against bullying and being part of the solution. And it ultimately changes the culture from within. We have both a grades K through 5 program that is a digital program online. It has an interactive storybook. It has videos and activities and lots of projects, and also an educator guide with, as I mentioned, those SEL aligned lesson plans. And what we see is that it's building empathy, it's creating healthy and stronger relationships, and wider social awareness. And I just love this picture of these students really owning their Start with Hello engagement. And then we have 6 through 12. So we have a middle and high school age appropriate version of our award-winning program, which includes a video training for students online. And I'll talk about how you can access all those resources. And again, teaching empathy to empower students to end social isolation, find someone who's alone, reach out, connect with them. And then that educator guidebook that is helping them to reinforce that culture of inclusion over time. The second program that we provide to school communities across the country is called Say Something. And this is teaching students how to recognize the signs of someone who may be at risk of hurting themselves and hurting someone else, and then ensure that they say something to a trusted adult. And we focus a lot on social media here because so much is happening online. That's where kids live their lives these days. And they know so much more than the adults do. And we need them to be the eyes and ears. So again, it's grounded in 3 simple steps: recognizing warning signs and threats, acting immediately and taking it seriously, and then ultimately saying something to a trusted adult. We have this across grades K through 12, and the key outcomes here are educating students. What are those signs and signals? What do they look like, especially on social media? Fostering, again, that upstander culture of not snitching, but ensuring that we're telling when someone is at risk or, could potentially be in harm's way. And then reducing violence, suicide ideation, cutting, bullying, all forms of violence in school communities. And ultimately, what we see is that more students are getting help. And this is truly something we see kind of overnight. So when we're working in school communities and training students on this program, we'll hear reports from schools coming back to us saying, you know what, after this training, we had a number of reports of students who might be at risk, friends kind of highlighting a warning sign in their peers, students bringing issues that they're seeing online to adults' attention so that they can intervene and ensure that everybody is safe. And so I kind of can't count how often that happens when we're working in school communities. And a recent Department of Homeland Security research proves that the best way to keep schools safe is to know the signs of someone who is at risk. So that is where all of this work is grounded in. Everything we do with our school communities is foundationally built on this program cycle. It is a 5-stage program cycle that ensures our school communities can see change over the long term. So they're starting with planning, then they're implementing training to ensure that everybody in the school community understands what the messages of these programs are, engaging with the broader school community to keep those messages a part of what they're doing every single day of the school year. What I like to say, part of the drinking water in their school, and then celebrating all of the successes and the work that they're doing to ensure that these messages stay strong with the school community, and ultimately growing that engagement over time. We see, I'll get to kind of our student leadership piece, but we really see incredible gains in student leadership over this cycle over time. So we know that in a lot of cases, students do not feel safe. They do not know who their trusted adult is, and they don't know how to report an issue. And so we have come up with the Say Something Anonymous reporting system, which allows students to report anonymously when they see that there is someone at risk in whatever manner. And we really ground this work in training to the school community. So before we are rolling out the program, there is a critical onboarding process that takes place. We're identifying a response team within the district and the schools that will react to any of the tips that are coming through. We're working with that team to define what is considered what we call a life safety tip, something that we have to act on very immediately, and a non-life safety tip. There's different kind of protocols for those. And then once we've educated the entire school community, we're rolling out that program across the board and ensuring that everybody knows how to access the resources. You're actually going to hear a little bit more about this from the kind of practical end when you get to hear from Stacy Schulman at Medford School District. There's 3 ways that students can report. They can use our mobile app, they can call in, and they can use the website. And it's really very simple for them to do so. And we have a nationally accredited crisis center where counselors are there 24/7, 365 days a week. We've been accredited via the American Association of Suicidology. And I would say that in all of our work, it can be very hard to point to the success, right? It's really hard to say what didn't happen. But what we have been able to do is showcase that we've been able to avert, at this point, up to 14 credible planned school shootings through our crisis center intervention. And one was just in the last month. And so that number keeps rising. And it is so important that we're able to kind of point to those, because again, it's really hard to say what didn't happen. And we know that we're making a difference in these school communities. So Then we have the youth leadership piece. This is kind of how all of our work comes to life inside schools, school communities. And they are called SAVE Promise Clubs. SAVE stands for Students Against Violence Everywhere. It's 30 plus years old as a mission and an organization. And we joined hands with SAVE a number of years back. It was started when a student named Alex Orange, who you see here, was shot at a party trying to defend others. And students within his school stood up and said, no more, we do not want this violence to happen. And the Save Promise Clubs really grew from there. And so we are so honored to have this a part of our programming. It is essential to ensure that youth are at the center of this conversation. We have 4,300 plus Save Promise Clubs nationwide and 153,000 plus members across the country. Those numbers are probably already dated. And the schools that are, every single school we work with, we are really working with them to define what a Save Promise Clubs looks like. This is not something that's a standalone. It can totally be part of a SAD club, a kindness club that's already happening within the school community, but it grounds our life-saving messages in the work that students are doing every single day. Most of our active clubs participate in about 4 activities a year. There's a National Youth Summit that brings together Save Promise Clubs from all across the country. And there are workshops and webinars throughout the year to really support those clubs in deepening their integration. There's also a chance for students to advocate at the national level as a member of the Youth Advisory Board. And I'm going to save that for Ariana Williams to share more about, because she's on our Youth Advisory Board. And it's centered in these 4 E's of educate, empower, engage, and encourage. And we have seen incredible work come from the student leadership that is happening all across this country. And you can see here, these are our current Youth Advisory Board members, again, representing student clubs from every corner of the country. And they are just phenomenal in the ways that they help us lead on this youth violence prevention charge. And you can learn more at our website. I will actually pop that in the chat. And what I also want to underscore is that everything we're doing is year round. So you can see there's a number of call to action weeks throughout the year. There are resources attached to other national events that are happening across the country. Just ensuring that schools are continually having this conversation is not about one assembly and then we walk away. This is about a conversation we need to have as a school community continuously throughout the school year. And then everything that I've shared with you in terms of Start with Hello, in terms of Say Something as programming supports, you can find inside the Learning Center and access for free. I'll pop that link inside the chat as well. And you can sign up as an educator, or as a parent or as a student. You can create a classroom and you can literally turnkey these trainings to your students with linked resources, educator guides, all that you need to have those critical conversations with your community. So with that, I'm just going to share, these are our handles all across social. If you want to follow us, we actually have Say Something Call to Action Week starting next week. You're going to see lots of schools all across the country and here in Massachusetts doing incredible work. So you can follow along to see what they're doing on the ground. And I will just share my email address in case anyone has questions and wants to follow up afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Darlene. And our plan is to have Stacy and Ariana speak, and then we'll open it up for questions for the 3 of them so they can join in to answer those questions. I'm also happy to welcome with us someone you've already heard so much about, Stacy Schulman, who serves as the Director of School Counseling and Behavioral Health for the Medford Public Schools. Stacy has over 10 years of experience in public education, both in the clinical and behavioral health and counseling space. And as the director of the school counseling, she's dedicated to helping students really reach their full potential by, again, using the evidence-based strategies and intervention to support their social and emotional needs. And Stacy is a licensed mental health clinician and school administrator who previously worked in public health as a psychological analyst. And she brings that experience of having looked at things, knowing what works, to her current role where she's working with students, parents, teachers, and administrators to really give kids wraparound support and resources to prioritize the safety and the well-being of individual kids as well as the student body. Stacy is currently pursuing her doctorate in education at the University of Massachusetts, And I'm really very grateful to have Stacy here to provide an on-the-ground perspective and her clinical expertise in terms of the collaboration Medford's been doing with Sandy Hook Promise. And I know I saw a question in the chat about where is Sandy Hook Promise working in Massachusetts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And also how they've been implementing the programming from Sandy Hook, like the Know the Signs and the anonymous reporting. I also hope that Stacy will give us today a sense of what she's seeing from young people in Medford, especially on this issue of gun violence and how it's impacting kids, even if it's not happening in their own school. So Stacy, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me here today. This is really an important topic. Again, as we stated, there are so many people here who are interested, and I'm pleased to talk about it. I am so grateful to, starting out for Sandy Hook Promise. And again, all of these things are available to us at no cost. So I'm going to share my screen a little bit and talk to you today about Medford Public Schools' experience with Sandy Hook. So just to start, a little background. Thank you, DA Ryan, for giving a little history on my background here. I'm a licensed mental health clinician. I've been working in public schools for 10 years. I have particular interest around threat assessments and school violence, not only because of the culture of the United States at the moment, but also because of my personal history. When I was a 17-year-old in high school, I witnessed a coworker. I grew up in a very sleepy, holistic town in New Hampshire where sort of everyone knew everyone. I worked at this really quaint pizza place, and I witnessed, now I know what I know now, I witnessed a coworker experience through a period of a week's time, a psychotic break, and who ended up stabbing another coworker. So as far as knowing the signs, this is such an important thing to teach. I wish I knew then what I know now, but being able to have the tools that are evidence-based to teach our youth some of these things, not only related to providing somebody mental health support, but knowing what to do when they hear about information from their friends that may be related to violence or bullying, isolation, loneliness. So Medford Public Schools began implementing Sandy Hook Promise programming in August of 2019. We currently have 4 of the programs running, which is the holistic package from Sandy Hook. Start with Hello, the Say Something, which is you're teaching students about the signs and who they can talk to. We also have Signs of Suicide, where we talk to students about mental health, how to acknowledge with their friend or for themselves about a mental health experience they're having, and who to tell about that for support. And then recently in January, we started implementing the Say Something Anonymous reporting system. Just yesterday, we had a panel with our students and our high school faculty talking about what works in our school that's positive and things we can work on. And holistically, all 6 students on that panel said one of the most important things that faculty can do in that school to make them feel safe and welcome is to stand outside your classroom and say hello during passing time. And it really brought in, the Start with Hello programming that we do through Sandy Hook Promise. But this is just something organically that students are looking for. They're really looking for that connection, that advice, and sort of that pathway for who to talk to when they're feeling overwhelmed. For the training related to the anonymous supporting system, we had administrators and faculty in our district trained in December. We worked with our Medford 911 dispatch, training with them in January, and then faculty and students were trained at the end of January as well when we went live with the anonymous reporting system, which was the last piece of the puzzle that I consider for Sandy Hook Promise programming. We also want to make sure that the anonymous reporting system is really accessible to our faculty, our students, our families. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense on where we placed it on our website. As Darlene stated, you can also call the number. There's an app you can use. There's a text feature, but we have it right on our website. So this is the high school website. It's also on the 2 middle school websites. You can see at the top, it just says anonymous reporting button right there. We also wanted to make sure that families and students could access information around Sandy Hook Promise anonymous reporting system and what that was. So we have it listed on our website as well. You can notice under support system, school counseling, and then right there, it's the Say Something Anonymous reporting system. And when they click on that, it provides you more details into what exactly the tip line is and how to submit a tip directly there. The common reports that come through the anonymous tip line range again from isolation, loneliness, mental health, but also have talked about sexual abuse, verbal and physical abuse, acts of violence, students talking about weapons, potentially researching or wanting to research through a school project weapons, substance abuse, suicidal threats, cutting. These are the types of tips that come in. And as Darlene stated, they range from tips that go directly to a school team to assess to life safety alerts where we're involving directly our Medford 911 for imminent risk. So how is it going so far? The tips are coming in. Administrators and counselors are working on tips, and we have ongoing coordination with our Medford Police Department, both to review the systems, make sure everyone has access, answer questions. There is, some important considerations when starting the anonymous reporting system. It took about a year's time. You really want to be mindful of preparing to implement this programming to ensure people understand and have the time and resources to put the proper training in place. There is required training for the programming. Administrators have to be able to have, a set amount of time during the day. You want to make sure you have incredible team communication, that you're all working together so that everyone understands the system. There are system tests that you go through to make sure that you're prepared, everyone has access. I would also, having gone through the system, have another follow-up internal meeting after that system test to make sure everyone, again, can log on. Sandy Hook provides some great tips and resources as far as making sure you save the anonymous tip line number in your phone, you code it in a certain way. So when you're getting those texts and calls that come through that there's been a tip line alert, you are fully aware of exactly what that is. Some considerations, you want to make sure that you understand what the team roles are going to be, and everyone else understands what their team roles are going to be. So there are, again, they've thought of everything. It's really handing it to you to implement, but you want to make sure you have an understanding and your team has an understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are when these tips come in. And you want to make sure you're connecting with your community partners. I am incredibly grateful for the partnership we had with Medford PD. I was just there yesterday working with their dispatch to make sure that we understand that where all the tips are coming in, how they're accessing it. So I know what they're looking at and that we're communicating well, and to see if they have any questions or concerns. You want to make sure you're communicating as much as you can with your school community, what exactly the tip line is, who it goes to, how it benefits us, how it's to be used. That includes parents and community partners. So you want to make sure if you're for Medford, I try really hard to work with a lot of mental health agencies in the area and to make sure they understand that we have this as well. And you want to incorporate some review and reflection time. So when those first tips start coming in, so when you do the training, and again, Sandy Hook does a really nice job of preparing you that once you do the training, there is going to be a wave of tips come in. And when you refresh every year, that sort of, brings it to the surface for our students. You want to make sure you're taking that time for, your after action or your review and reflection in terms of how did that tip come in? What was our procedures? What are questions that people have? What could we have done better? What other resources could we provide? Overall, it's working really well. this is just another way that we are getting to know our students, getting to know the information, and connecting with our students to not only support them, but for violence prevention as well. So thank you for allowing me to speak about it here today.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And you know, you've heard a lot about the programs, but one of the things we really tried to do in this expert witness series is have the voice of people that are being impacted by them, that are using the programs. And that's why I'm so delighted to have Ariana Williams here with us today. Ariana is a student at Tantascwa Regional High School. She first became involved with the Save Promise Club during 8th grade, which was her first year back in school full-time after the pandemic. She ran Love When Women Run. She ran for the secretary of her school student council e-board, which had a Save Promise Club. And she knew when she did that, Ariana realized she wanted to have an impact on the school's environment, and she has done that through the club's actions. One of the accomplishments that Ariana is really most proud of is the distribution of pride flags and inclusive decor throughout the school. During Black History Month, the Save Promise Club at the school passed out small note cards where students wrote their dreams and held a fundraiser for the NAACP. They've also put up posters with mental health hotline information in bathrooms. They've raised $1,000 through a school dance for children in the Ukraine. And Ariana, I'm just really so happy to have you here today, because this is not an easy thing to do, to come on a program to speak to a lot of people about your work, and we recognize that. But I'm hoping that you'll talk to us a little bit about your experience with the programs and the work that you've been doing with the Youth Advisory Board. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me. Hi, so yeah, I started with my Save Club in 8th grade. It was my first year back, and I wasn't really sure about Save Clubs. I wasn't sure about Sandy Hook Promise. I didn't really know what any of these things were. I didn't know what they meant, and I didn't realize what a big threat there was to me and my school and just the people I'm around all the time. So I will definitely point out that Sandy Hook Promise has brought a lot of education to me personally, and also to my peers and to even teachers, I would say. So the thing that I would want to say from the youth perspective is there's a lot of fear in my school, in people I know, and even I have that fear. Coming to school every day, you think, I'm getting on the bus, I'm going to school, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna do homework, whatever. But then there's also that fear in the back of your head. Do I even know, am I gonna come home today? Am I gonna be able to go home and talk to my mom and talk to my sisters? Am I gonna be able to do these things? Because there's just this constant threat and this constant fear as a student. So these programs, they brought me into being a very aware leader, because before, like I said, I didn't really know a lot about it. I didn't even know how I was going to lead a club. I just knew that there were problems already that I wanted to do something about. And once this was brought to my attention, obviously I wanted to do a lot more about that. The programs, the Start with Hello specifically, brings a lot of unity into our schools, which is a big part to, prevent violence in the future. Because if we can talk to each other, if we can know each other, it's easier to see those signs. For example, we have a day where we all kind of wear green. We have other days where we will do blankets. So there's always different activities that, like I said, bring unity to our school, which helps point out signs. And especially our Say Something program, which is next week. We have a lot that we've been working on, because this is Tantascwa's first Save Club, so this will be their first Say Something week. We've been working on a lot of different activities and different ways to teach about the warning signs and spread the word, spread the warning signs, what to look for throughout the school. So that's very exciting. Another thing we've worked on a lot this year to stop this gun violence and stop this fear that we all have is an anonymous reporting system. So obviously, as we were just talking about, Sandy Hook has their own, but that didn't really work in our school just because of the way we have our education system set up. So our Safe Club has been working on this all year. We set up our own anonymous reporting system. It's a Google Doc of sorts, and we kind of just go in, fill it out, and there's an anonymous part, so you don't have to say who you are. Obviously, if they want to, they can, but they don't have to. So that was something really big, and it will be implemented next year. So that will be the first year Tantasco's ever had anonymous reporting systems. As the problem is growing larger and as more people are at risk, as more people are dying, as more of these horrific events are occurring, it's become more important to us that we have to do something in our school because we're no different than any other school in the country. You know, all these schools, they think that'll never happen to us, that'll never happen to us, and then it does. So taking these steps to prevent it, it gives us a little bit of hope. It makes me feel less hopeless seeing all these things happening on the news, knowing that I could have been there. I mean, it happens in our area. There was a shooting in a mall I was at just a couple of weeks ago, and I had only left 30 minutes before. That's really scary to think about, that this is such a big threat. So we work hard on this. We worked hard on this anonymous reporting system, hoping to bring a little bit of hope into everybody's hearts and everybody's eyes. And so that's important. And after running the Safe Club for a year, being on the National Youth Advisory Board also brings a lot of hope to me, because like I said, it's very easy to feel hopeless. It's very easy to feel defeated. It's very easy to just feel like there's no end to this. You know, it's happening every single day. There's no way that I can do anything because I'm so young, and I just have to sit back and watch. But being on that board, being at a national level, showed me that that's not true, and that even being young, even, you know, I'm only in my first year of high school. Being young, you can still have a voice, and it's important to have a voice because, like you said, being in the school, we're the ones that see it. Being on social media, we're the ones that see it. That shows that we have that voice. And I had no idea that the board was going to be so important to me. I thought I signed up and I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I'll probably just join some virtual meetings with people I don't really know. But I ended up flying across the country and meeting these other people who have the exact same ideas as me. They have the same inspirations as me. They have the same passion as I do. And that was incredibly inspiring, to meet people who want to change things just like I do. And like I said, they have the same fear. They go to school across the country, but they still are scared. You know, it's not just us. So they became like family to me, honestly. The Youth Advisory Board is so important to me, and they change things for the better. And I know that there is a brighter future because of them, because of Sandy Hook Promise, and because of these people who are working hard to ensure our safety. So yeah, that's from the youth perspective. There's, like I said, there's a lot of fear. Honestly, there is. Every time you see it on the news, every time you hear about it, every time students come to school talking about it, it's terrifying. I mean, it's honestly one of my worst fears. And I think the part that makes it scariest is how real it is. Like I said, you think it'll never happen to you, but then it does, and it can. And that's really, that gives a lot of anxiety. But it's good to know that that as a group and as friends, as families, we can make a difference, and that means a lot to me.
Well, Ariana, you're certainly making a difference, and I can tell you, everybody on this call is thinking, when I was in 9th grade, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't get up and do that. So you should be very proud of yourself. And can we see your shirt? You Sandy Hook.
Yes.
I just realized that was your Sandy Hook Promise shirt. That's great. That's a great shirt.
Yes.
Thank you, Ariana. So what
Thank
we're going to
you.
do is, I want to just make sure that we get all of the information out and then give people time to ask questions. So we're going to go to Sarah. Sarah Wilden, who's a good friend of our office. We've worked on with so many cases. Sarah's a special agent with the FBI where she's been for over 10 years. She has done investigations in domestic, international terrorism, white collar crime, crimes against children. I've known Sarah for a long time. She talks about lots of things because she's done so much of this work. And prior to working for the FBI, Sarah earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in psychology and worked for a nonprofit organization that provided mental health care for adults. And that background and experience, both inside and outside of the FBI, led her to being appointed as the threat management and behavioral analyst unit coordinator for the Boston field office. And I'm so grateful that Sarah is here with us today to share more about the work she does, the scope of the issues we're looking at, and also just the resources that exist around threat management. And, you know, I would say that not a week goes by in our county that we aren't hearing from some school about whether either through the anonymous reporting or some other way a threat's been communicated. And there's just such concern about how do you tell the parents, what do you tell the kids, what steps do you take? So Sarah, I'm really grateful to have you here this morning.
Yes, thank you, District Attorney Ryan. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you to my fellow panelists as well. You guys did a wonderful job presenting some great information. And thank you all to the audience for being here. As I scrolled through the attendance list, I realized that several of you have probably seen a little bit of what I have to say, and several more of you I have worked with personally on cases of some nature. So it's nice to see everybody here. I will kind of pick and choose what we're going to talk about just because I want to leave time at the end for questions for everybody. So like District Attorney Ryan said, I am part of the Mass Bay Threat Assessment Team. This is an FBI-led team, but it's made up of community panelists. So we have a lot of state agencies that are represented. We have a lot of law enforcement, clinicians, several different members that make up our team. And our goal is really to provide threat assessment and threat management services to a variety of referrals and cases that might come to us. We're dealing mostly in the scope of targeted violence, and I'll touch on that just a bit. One thing that's important to know about our team, how we get the information. So a lot of our fusion centers and intelligence centers feed that information into receptacle systems that we then have access to, or we get referrals directly from the district attorney's office. We get them from local police departments, maybe outside agencies, and then all of our members who might have access to somebody who's of concern is welcome to bring those referrals to us as well. We're made up of, like I was saying, several different core members and affiliate members. Our core members have access to resources, they have knowledge and expertise in threat assessment, or they can provide some kind of unique perspective from their discipline that helps us build a threat picture and then decide what a mitigation strategy would be. Our single most important feature is that we are multidisciplinary. This is not a law enforcement team. This is not a mental health team. We believe that in threat assessment, not one solution is going to solve these problems. And so we want to have as many disciplines represented on our team as possible so that we can leverage the perspective, expertise, and insight of all of those disciplines who are sitting at our table. To build a threat assessment, your full assessment is only as accurate as the information you have. So we think that the more information we can gather and the more perspectives that can look at that information and interpret it from their side, the better off we are for building out a mitigation strategy and deciding what is going to work. So just really quickly, I wanted to touch on kind of what is the scope of our team, right? When we're talking about targeted violence, whether that's school shooting, public shooting, mass casualty, workplace violence, we have a scope of what we're dealing with. These are low probability but high consequence events. So what is it? Targeted violence is really an incident where an assailant is choosing a particular target, whether that be an individual or a group of individuals for whatever reason. That is what is summing up what we look at for targeted violence. Affective versus predatory violence. This is probably terms that you guys have heard before. Affective violence is responding to a situation, responding to a situation that is inflammatory to you, right? So somebody makes you upset, you react in violence or anger, that is affective violence. Predatory violence is more planned out, it's thoughtful, sometimes it can lack emotion in developing a plan to commit violence against another group or another person. So mostly what we deal with is the predatory violence. We know that people who commit attacks such as school shootings, they don't just snap. They consider, plan, and prepare. That is predatory violence, and we are looking for the behavioral indicators that tell us that somebody is on that pathway. So threat assessment is really using a systematic fact-based method to examine all of that information and all of those behavioral indicators and put it together into a package so that we can form a mitigation plan. And that is the threat management piece of it. To have threat assessment without threat management, you're really not getting the job done. A lot of people can take a look at somebody's concerning risk factors and decide if somebody is or is not a threat. But it's what do we do with that after? And that's one of the things our team is trying to solve. Threat assessment and threat management, often called TATM, is not perfect. This is not a miracle cure. It is a preventative, proactive approach to targeted violence to try and stop these events from happening. TATM should not be done individually. This works best on a multidisciplinary team or with a team of people from the same agency, such as a school. Threat assessment and threat management is not compiling information as a means to terminate, expel, or otherwise remove that person from their environment. Oftentimes we want to leverage where they are at if we can determine their safety for the public or the immediate people around them, to use that as a support, and they can provide insight to the behaviors that they're seeing. We've recently run into where private companies are using what they want to call threat assessment as a way to justify why they're terminating an employee. That is not what threat assessment is meant to be. Threat assessment is meant to come in the package with threat management and utilize the resources that we have available to help decrease those concerning behaviors and get somebody off the pathway to violence. Our team specifically, and I won't speak for every team that's out there, our team covers a scope, like I was talking about before, that deals around targeted violence. The scope typically would not cover a threat of sexual assault, gang violence, people who have been in the criminal justice system and we're trying to determine if they're going to be a problem again, or people who are at risk of causing some kind of damage to their workplace, like property or intellectual damage or disrepute to the company, right? We don't want just a disgruntled employee to come to our team unless there is concern that they may act out in violence. So I think it's important to kind of emphasize what that scope is, because we don't want the message to get lost in the shuffle that we're cherry picking referrals or that we're only taking certain things. We're really looking for things that fall under that umbrella of targeted violence. How do we do that? Like I said, we're looking for behavioral indicators, and one of the models we follow is pathway to violence. So this was a concept that was developed by Dr. Robert Fine and Special Agent Brian Boskiel of the Secret Service back in 1998, where they, after conducting a research project called the Exceptional Case Study, developed what we see as 6 steps now, but these are the behavioral indicators that can show us that steps are taken prior to an attack, that we have an opportunity to intervene. And that's really where we want to find people, is anywhere under step 6. Anywhere before that attack is us trying to intervene by noticing these behavioral indicators. How do we do that? The first thing we have to do to put together a threat assessment team, or a threat assessment for a person of concern rather, is information gathering. So we're looking, again, leveraging that multidisciplinary approach to building as much information about the person that we can, and using that information to see which indicators are there and which aren't. So Dr. Reed Malloy, who's very prominent in the threat assessment field as well, he had once compared this to a cardiac event. I can look into a school body, or I can look into a workplace employee roster, and I cannot tell you which one is most likely to have a cardiac event. But I can look at each of you individually, take down your risk factors, look at family history, look at lifestyle factors, and I can determine which one of you is more likely to have a cardiac event. And that's the same thing we're doing. I can't look into a school and see who may or may not act out in violence, but when I start putting together those risk factors through gathering information, now I can tell you who is most likely to commit that act of violence. And what are we going to do about it? So as we build our threat assessment, we're looking for things that enhance our concern. What are some of those indicators that make us more concerned about somebody and indicate that they could act out in violence? It could be their mental health history. It could be social environment problems. It could be their access to weapons. There's a lot of enhancers that we try and gather information on because that informs how we are concerned about that person. But what we don't want to do is use demographics, right? And then on the flip side of looking for enhancers, we're also looking at the protective factors or mitigators. So what does that person have in their life that makes them less likely to commit an attack? Because although sometimes people may appear very threatening or appear that they would likely commit an act of violence, sometimes we, with our own biases, whether we are aware of them or not, may look at somebody and think that they may be more likely to commit an attack when really they're not the ones who are demonstrating the concerning behaviors. So we look at both sides of that to try and determine who is or who isn't more likely. And then we put that together in an assessment and build a mitigation strategy to help bring them off that pathway. What am I talking about when I talk about mitigation strategy? Excuse me. I'm talking about using the interventions and the access to resources within a community, whether that community be isolated to a school or whether it extend farther out through a town, or from our level, we're using state resources, state mental health, state prosecution, whatever it might be, to access those resources that somebody might need to build up those mitigations, the mitigators and protective factors, so that we're decreasing the likelihood of them committing an attack while simultaneously addressing what is charging the enhancers to present. So what are the underlying causes that we can address through different interventions, whether it's social isolation or family dynamics, something like that, that we can improve on so that they feel less likely of committing an act of violence. Our team has conducted over 30 consultations since August of 2021. It's really kind of running a mix of between adults and juveniles. We've seen an uptick in juveniles just recently since January. But in addition to conducting formal consultations, we handle multiple cases informally. So those people of concern who may be having a psychotic episode, who are saying threatening things but pose very little risk, we can usually mitigate those informally by passing them off to our partners without having to conduct an assessment. And we cover all violations. So any kind of targeted violence, which could fall under terrorism, mass casualty, if it's a communicated threat online, or even just concerning behaviors that we're starting to put together, even though they haven't made a threat, we still look at those and try and build those assessments out. So one big piece of my job is that I am out there training and presenting often so that our word gets out, so that people understand what threat assessment is, and that we want to make sure that everyone knows what they need to be looking for. So there's how to request training or get in contact. And then there's my personal contact information if you have questions or want to talk to me about building your own threat assessment team or leveraging the resources that are there. So thank you, everyone, for letting me come and briefly speak about that.
Thank you, Sarah. Back. Okay, there we go. we are happy to take questions at this point, and I know we're getting close to the time, so some people may need to leave, but if you want to put your question in the chat, we will get answers to those questions and get back to you if you can't do that. And you can do questions either by putting them in the chat for me, and I'll try to keep an eye on that, or physically raise your hand or use the electronic hand raise. And maybe Madeline and Megan can just help me out, make sure we get everybody. Questions for any of our panelists? Eric, Sarah, people are wondering if they can get your contact info again. So maybe just throw that in the chat as well. Linda.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. It gives me hope and feels empowering. And the resources from Sandy Hook and how they've been used is really encouraging and enlightening. I just had a very quick question about the anonymous reporting. Is there a system to let the person or people know who have reported something that their concerns have been heard? Because we talked a lot about the fear and the mitigation of that. And if you send out a concern and then hear nothing, that doesn't do a lot to mitigate the fear. So I'm just wondering if any of the panelists could address that. Thank you.
That's a great question. Stacy, you want to talk a little bit about it in the practical piece, and then Darlene, maybe the overarching plan?
Absolutely. So when a tipster reports on the anonymous reporting system, they're immediately connected with someone from the call center. So there is an opening screen when you log on. Let's just say you're doing it virtually, either through the app or online. You choose what school community you belong to, your information, what you want to report. It's usually a couple sentences up to a few paragraphs, and then you're immediately connected to the call center who validates your concerns, asks you follow-up questions. On some of the tips we've received, the person who is sending in the report just immediately logs off and does not want to continue communication, but we do have some tips that have come in where there is continued communication. Additionally, it provides you the resources for you on your school team or 911 dispatch to then reach back out to the person anonymously through that platform. Again, I'm really not trying to overinflate it. It is very impressive on how much they've thought about. And then the tipster receives a code. So if they wanted to log back in or receive additional information, they can follow up and provide you more. So there is a lot of back and forth that is available when they provide that anonymous report.
Great. Darlene?
I mean, Stacy covered it. We have a kind of a proven protocol that we utilize that undergirds all of that communication. And so I think Stacy really covered the highlights there.
All right, other questions for any of our panelists? Liz Doncaster.
Hi, I'm Liz Doncaster. I'm the Director of Student Services for Somerville Public Schools. We actually did do the grant with Sandy Hook with the Say Something, and it was in the Promise program. We had a very good experience with that. My question might be for Sarah though. So, because I'm in the beginning stages of putting together a district-wide threat assessment team. We recently had our first meeting. And one of the questions was, when we start looking at students' risk behavior and maybe possibly, I don't want to say tracking or keeping them on our radar, I had a little pushback on that, we have to take into consideration how young the student is and what type of documentation we're going to have for that student that may have done a written thread or a drawing or something when they were in 2nd and 3rd grade, but now they're in 8th grade or now they're in 9th grade and they're choosing fighting or they're getting into something a little heavier. How long and when do you start tracking those type of behaviors, and is it appropriate to do so in a way that doesn't feel like profiling or stigmatizing the student? Does that make sense?
Sarah, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's one that all of the teams are wrestling with, is to what level are we trying to document? I think for schools, especially, I won't give you a roadmap for how you can document, but I do think that the information has to be there and has to be able to be passed along, because what we don't want is someone who has been showing concerning behaviors for a very long time to not have that information be part of a threat assessment if their behaviors start to escalate. And so what we've seen with working with other schools is if the child has moved schools recently, or if they've gone from like a middle school to a high school, that problematic behavior is not being passed along. And so when they go to do a threat assessment, they're missing a lot of information. And it creates this snapshot type threat assessment that doesn't really take into account the totality of circumstances. And so although I wouldn't necessarily advocate for extensive documentation that goes into a permanent file, the threatening behavior has to be noted and documented according to your policies so that it can be passed along as the student progresses if they're going down that pathway of violence.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say it was a really great program. Sorry, I haven't been speaking for a little bit. The question I have was more towards the Sandy Hook promises and the data collection. You're dealing with children, and I'm not sure what that implies. So I'd be interested in hearing whether it's metadata that they're collecting, or is it specific data, not so much for threat assessment, but for privacy reasons. So thank you.
Charlie, you take that.
Hi, Mike. I don't know that I can fully answer your question today because I think it's in relation to the anonymous reporting system data, if that's where you're going. Okay. And I want to say that I'm not the kind of holder of the entire process, so I don't want to misspeak here. I'm happy to get back to you though. If you want to pop me your information, I will get back to you with how we track that, but I don't really have all of the details there. If one of my colleagues are on and want to pop on, they can share, and if Stacy has information from her experience with the anonymous reporting team, but I don't want to misspeak on that one.
Thank you. Andrew. You're on mute. Here we go.
Hello, hi. Thank you, Marion. I just wanted to actually add a comment and sort of first off, say thank you. District Attorney Marion Ryan, she's a true hero, and she actually moderated.
Andrew is not my brother.
Say that again.
You're not my brother.
No. She had moderated a event that we had back in November on firearms. It was a panel discussion. We had the chief of police, we had educators, we had some of you attending actually were on that panel as well. Sonia, I saw you in the invite list. So I want to actually just say this is the second time that we're having a discussion, at least from my purview. And one of the things that I've made an observation about is that there is a sort of third rail subtopic that ends up coming up, and I do want to keep it on the table. We're discussing a lot about threat assessment, dealing with those threats ahead of time. That this is all wonderful. However, the one thing that is common to all gun-related crimes is the gun. So proliferation, you can't avoid having a discussion about firearm safety without having a discussion about proliferation, especially when you have I believe the statistics are two guns per person in the United States, and that is concentrated amongst 40% of the households. So it really starts getting into a cultural issue. I just want to pop that out there. Maybe in the future we can have some conversations about that. I do one particular thing, and I'll leave it with this. I had done a lot as far as like looking at the issue of there's a myth of the that a gun will help you in preventing crime. That's not the case. So we're seeing more and more evidence out there that done by many reputable sources that say that you're actually inviting problems and accidents and issues. That is a legitimate topic, and I really would like to address that in the future. I know that we don't have as much of that's not part of this particular conversation, but let's keep it on the in our minds and yeah, that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Andrew. And Andrew's right. You know, I say all the time, I've been a prosecutor for a very long time. And I have never had a case where somebody having a gun, the victim having a gun, or the intended victim, made the situation better. So I know that's a thought. That's always something that's out there, but it's a significant myth in most cases. I think we have time for one more question. Anybody else have a question for our panelists? People want to put questions in the chat? No? Going once, going twice? All right. I want to thank our panelists so much for sharing today. I hope that all of you, who we thank as well, who joined us today, got really an overview, as well as the resources that are out there, how those resources are being put in place right here in our county, and how students and young people are receiving those resources and getting ready to move forward as they take the lead on so much of this issue. So thank you all so very, very much. Hope to see you again soon. Stay safe. Thank you.